hate gridlock. Just blatant gridlock. You know, I admit I'm not a big fan of compromising either. Just ask a few of my ex-girlfriends. But still, we've got to do the will of the people. Okay? Let's see. Pardon me, I was clearing my throat. Last couple of days, I've been teasing you about my feelings on Knight Rider. And this is, today marks the 31st anniversary of the debut of that TV show back in 1982. And now I'm going to tell you the rest of the story, to quote the late great Paul Harvey. Oddly enough, when I first learned about the show that summer, I was not interested in seeing it. Yeah, I remember seeing this Trans Am going across the desert with this flashing red light in the front of it, and I thought, that's kind of neat. But I just really wasn't captivated enough to say, I'm going to watch that show. And I don't know why, because now it seems like a no-brainer. It had all the elements I like in the TV show at the time. It would appeal to a young boy at that age. It had a flashy car, a bunch of electronics, had a superhero crime fighter, had hot women in the show. I still have a thing for Bonnie. April was okay, but I preferred Bonnie. Bonnie to me was more down to earth. Now, when I watched the show in later years, I see that April was more of a sweetheart. Bonnie was kind of a bitch, especially in that first season. Now, I don't know if it's because the actress that played her, Patricia McPherson, was ticked off with NBC because one of the reasons why they fired her in the second season is because she demanded more money. And, well, anyway, watching it in reruns, April was more of a sweetheart. Now, when Bonnie came back in the third and fourth seasons, she had mellowed out a little bit. Now, I can understand why Patricia McCormick wanted more money. I mean, you had a hot show at the time. I mean, Knight Rider was a pretty damn big deal. For those of you not old enough to remember or weren't around at the time, think of it like Survivor or something like that when it first came out, or, you know, a popular show today, kind of like NCIS. Now, not the same intellectual level, but it was certainly very popular that first season. At least it was in my class. Anyway, Patricia McCormick wanted more money. And NBC said, no, you're not going to get more money, you're not going to get more screen time. You're stuck with this. So that's where that went with that. And she was written out of the second season, no explanation, then came back in the third, got a nice reintroduction back into the rest of the show. But originally, I was not interested in watching Knight Rider. And oddly enough, and I think I've told you about this kid, Paul Moyer was a prominent childhood bully and picked on me relentlessly because his mom babysat me for a couple of years. Well, Paul was jealous of me and the attention that I was getting, and I didn't really demand that much attention. I never really have. Now, you're saying, well, why are you doing a podcast? Well, because I do love to entertain. This is my way of expressing that. But anyway, his family was like a surrogate family to my own. As a matter of fact, his sister was always sweet to me. She still is. Keeps in touch, and likes my sense of humor. Her Paul's brother and I, we didn't talk much back then. Well, we have since become friends via Facebook. And Paul's parents were like surrogate parents to my own. Marilyn Moyer, I felt like I could talk to her in confidence, and we kept in touch off and on over the years. And then Paul's dad, really good guy, Jake Moyer. But there were times when Paul and I couldn't get along, that he would put aside hostilities. And I realized later on, even more recently, that he was insecure about his perceived level of intelligence. I think he went through a lot of remedial classes that just didn't work out for him. Because I remember when we role-played in Star Trek, he always let me be Captain Kirk. And he wanted to be Mr. Spock. And I realize now that Spock was the logical, cerebral one. And he perceived me as logical and cerebral. Now, through our academic prowess, it was probably more that I was more like Spock in that regard. I had no desire to be a leader, desire to be a captain, to speak of. Well, anyway, getting back to Knight Rider, I knew about the show coming up, and for whatever reason, I did not watch the pilot episode in its original run. It was on a Sunday night, and I think it came on at 8 o'clock. I don't remember. It may have been 7. I know it was the NBC Sunday night movie, so I'm pretty sure it was on at 8 o'clock Central Time, but I have to check on that. So I did not watch it. And several of my friends in my class, and the class before me and the class after me, were talking about this show and about what this car could do and all this stuff, about what the show was about. But it was really Paul's insistence throughout that week that said, you got to watch this show, man. It is cool. This car can do 180s, jump over buildings, talk, and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, well, he talked it up. And that next Friday when the show came on, I watched it. And I fell in love with the concept immediately. I became a big Knight Rider fan immediately. I love the car. I love the technology. I love the action. I love the script. It wasn't terribly cerebral, but it was a nice release after a long week. And I became a fan of it. Now, as a matter of fact, I was one of the few people in my class that watched it through the rest of the run. Now, I admit, I missed out on the pilot episode, so the first few episodes were kind of, I didn't fully grasp what was going on until I saw the pilot episode. And kind of a spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what happened in the pilot episode, or not, although I'm pretty sure by now most people know the premise of the story. A police officer from Los Angeles named Michael Long gets shot, left for dead. Multi-billionaire by a man in the name of Will Tonight, rescues him, gives him a new face, a new identity, and a new lease on life. And among those things is this flashy new Pontiac Trans Am with this AI computer to fight crime. The car is virtually indestructible. And I became a fan of it after that. So that's the story of how I got involved in Knight Rider. And over the years, I incorporated the ideals of Michael Knight. Now, personally, I think David Hasselhoff is an asshole. I think he's a jerk. He's screwed up his life. I try to have patience with him. I know he's got problems with drug and alcohol addiction, and he needs to resolve that. He needs to resolve his anger. I've seen some of the bloopers from the original Knight Rider, and the guy is clearly self-centered, arrogant, and Michael Knight was to a certain extent, but Michael Knight was more laid back, I thought. Whereas David Hasselhoff could be a real jerk. I can see where he could be a pain in the ass to work with. So I'm not a big Hoff fan. I wish him well and hope that he gets peace with his past. Because everyone deserves to have peace with their past, and my opinion of it might change. But as far as Michael Knight, I admired his deductive reasoning, his carefree attitude towards life, to have fun, but also to fight for the underprivileged and the little guy. And that's part of who I am. And that's why I've become more outspoken on certain topics in my life, especially the Affordable Care Act, and also why I'm an advocate of abortion rights. Now, I don't like abortion, but I don't believe outlawing it is going to solve anything. As a matter of fact, I believe it will make things worse, but we won't get into that right now. But as far as Michael Knight as a person, I admire those qualities. And I've come to believe that one person can make a difference. One person can make a big, big difference. And sometimes you don't see it until after that person is gone. And after my dad died, I realized how much more of an impact he had on my life, especially now. Because I find myself doing some of the same things he did or would have done. Now, that's not to say that I've adopted all of his personality, but I understand more about the decisions he made and how he did them and why. It's all clear to me now. And I just wish he were alive so I could tell him that, but I think he knew that at the end. But that's why Knight Rider is one of those shows that really stands out with me. Knight Rider, Star Trek were two of my biggest influences growing up. Those were probably the two biggest shows that I tuned to daily or weekly to to learn the latest lesson, because they are really lessons about morality. Now, I had some issues with Knight Rider. For example, there were also 3 different Michael Knights, I thought. You had the Michael Knight in the pilot episode and the first few episodes after that, in which he was just really carefree. I mean, he did the right thing, albeit he bent some of the rules at times to get to those goals. And then you have the Michael Knight who was deeply in love with his fiancée from his former life, Stephanie Mason, played by his first real wife, I believe, first or second real wife. I think it's his first wife. I'm trying to think how many times he's been married. Is it 2 or 3 times? 2 times or 3? I think it's 2 times. Anyway, the actress, oddly enough, she ended up marrying an actor named Michael Knight later on. But anyway, you had Michael Knight who was in love with Stephanie. And one of the things that bothered me later on, I didn't see it in the original run because I wasn't that mature yet, was that if Michael was so in love with Stephanie, then how could he act so freely with other women? True, he didn't have the legal ramifications of dealing with Michael Long anymore. He was now Michael Knight. Michael Long was dead. But you would still have those memories and those feelings from your former life. So how could he act so freely? I don't think I could, at least not that fast. And then you had the third Michael Knight, which is what I call the standard Michael Knight. Kind of a combination of the 2 previous. But I never thought I would talk about this much about Knight Rider on a podcast, but that didn't have anything to do with the show. So that's the central theme of today's program. Alright? Well, rolling on. But before I do that, for the last few days and weeks, you've probably heard this music bed. Now, that music bed was from the pilot episode of the original Knight Rider. It was in the opening shot when we see Las Vegas before we see any characters. That, to me, is a reminder that there are always multiple paths to the same goal, and to try to stay on the straight and narrow. Okay. Plus, I just like that music bed. It's a good, upbeat, get your attention, get you right into the action. So, speaking of getting right into the action, I'm going to take a quick break, as I have talked about all I'm going to talk about on my Bruce Williams segment of the program for today. And kind of a condensed show today. For some reason, I'm not able to get CBS News this morning, so I'm going to try something a little bit different later on. And in the meantime, load some PSAs here, and when we come back, we'll have things you need to know on this Thursday. So stick around, won't you? You're listening to First Cup.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
These are the sounds of someone taking their eyes off the road. Texting while driving is more than distracting. It's dangerous. Do us all a favor. When you're on